everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Gargee, and Anandi is here, and we are the hosts of Stars and Feathers Read Along, in which we decided to read all the published work of Kayla Ancrum, who is here with us today, and
Hey.
Anna-Marie McLemore. So Kayla Ancrum is an acclaimed author of the books The Wicker King and The Way of the Stars, and we're really glad that you decided to join us today, Kayla. Hi, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So we have read both of your books for a really long, and people have been just like outpouring support. They have just been blown away, especially by the
Yeah.
King, because they're just like, "Oh my God, what is this?" And yeah, so we both had a really great time, and we can't wait to see what you do next. We're really excited for
Thank you.
all your upcoming projects and Darling that is coming out on 22nd June of 2021. So let's begin with the questions.
Okay. So hi Kayla, this is Anandi. So we started the read along with the Wicker King because I was kind of adamant on it because I was like, we're gonna have to set the mood for this, and the Wicker King is perfect. And everybody absolutely adored it because it's this special brand of weird, right? Like, not everyone gets it, but everybody's just like, I don't know what's going on, but I want to keep reading it. And everybody absolutely adored it, and they loved how the writing was like, it was kind of genre bendy, like you don't know what's going on, and everybody was just like really talking about that. So I wanted to ask you what your inspiration for the book was, and how did you what the narrative process was for the whole thing. Like, how did you come up with the idea of a narrative that is so in between genres, and how did you like execute it so well?
Oh, thank you. Okay, so when I first started writing The Wicker King, I was actually in college. I was 20, I believe.
Oh my
And
God.
and I was a horrible student, and I literally would like write during class. So one of the ways that I would write was on my phone on the website Tumblr using their like blogging format. So one of the main reasons why it's in like such a short format is because I was using that as the application I was writing with. Also, I have ADHD, and it's a lot easier for me to write like kind of shorter form
Yeah.
things than like
Yeah.
long chapters. And I figured, if I was going to have the opportunity to write in this industry and to have my work, mass produced and stuff like that, I wanted to create something that's accessible for people who are like me. So that's the reason I had that format that way. In regards to my inspiration, another thing that I used to do was just go on Wikipedia binges, and I would just like pick like, random article, and just like read the whole thing and be like, that was cool. Now I'm going to learn about, brown bears, or fancy tea, or taro root, or just like whatever it was that I would land on.
Yeah.
And I happened to land on the condition that Jack has called peduncular hallucinosis.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
I was reading about it, and it was so fascinating to read about because it's one of, I think, 3 hallucinatory disorders that you can have that don't include psychosis, meaning that you can have no mental illness at all whatsoever and still get it. Because basically what it is that there's something, whether it's a tumor or lesions or even just like a machine, is pressing on the part of your brain that is both for vision and for creativity. And I was like, that's really cool. That's really interesting. As somebody who's had like mental health struggles, and have had friends who have had mental health struggles and had the adults around them deal with them in varying levels of successful and unsuccessful, I thought that it would be kind of cool to write a book about 2 characters, one who has mental illness, another who has physical illness, and kind of build an environment in which they are in need of like assistance, and how the adults and people in their lives would react to the situation that's going on with them. And at the time, because I was 20, so I had just finished being a teenager, so this feeling of like neglect and isolation was very real and present, and of the time for me, of that era. And having the character of August, because a lot of people ask me like, why didn't you make it from Jack's perspective? I wanted it to be from August's perspective because I wanted the reader to watch him doing these things that are clearly like deconstructions of his health, like misbehaving in class out of nowhere, his grades slipping, him ditching classes, different things that he does.
Is
Yeah, and having that evidence like right in front of you, but not being told this is the sick person, and having people being able to see that and make their own conclusions about it was kind of important for me, because at the time I was very into the lesson of like teenagers really need adult assistance, and you can't be call yourself like a guardian or a teacher or a mandated responder if you're unwilling to be able to view certain things that teenagers do that are cries for help, and you're just kind of looking at them and being like, oh, you're a bad kid. Like that was like so real to me. I was so offended by that. Like as an adult who now is in a position where I'm offering that stuff to like other people and stuff, I have like a more sober view about that sort of thing, where I'm like less like railing against the world and more like we are the people who need to be doing it, because now I'm not the victim, I'm the perpetrator of assistance. But that's why I wrote The Wicker King.
Yeah, I think it was, especially with how the twins reacted, like they have kind of a very adult overview. They're like, there's something wrong with him, and like this is not normal, and August, you're perpetrating this and you're letting it happen. But at the same time, they are not the ones who go to adults and be like, hey, something is happening to him. Because I think all teenagers have this perspective of, oh, no one can help us, we have to deal with this ourselves.
Yeah.
And they don't trust, and like rightfully so, right? Like you don't trust the adults because they don't give you anything to trust them for.
Exactly.
The
respect is like not mutual,
it's always an us against them thing, and it's understandable.
So with The Weight of the Stars and as well as The Wicker King, they're both very different genres and they have different tones. But then there's this element of them coming together and them like unmeshing together. So when you started writing out The Weight of the Stars, did you plan this connection beforehand, or did it just happen without your permission, or like is this something?
I did actually. So when I was like 13, 14, I was really into two different groups that did something relatively similar. The first was Tamara Pierce. She's kind of at the time, like if people aren't familiar with her, at the time she was one of the only like sci fantasy writers who was really popular with teenagers that wrote like girl power type stories and like stuff that was really, really ahead of its time, And she had this thing where she'd write like a bunch of different books and they would be like, oh, this one character from that other book is in it. And I thought that was really fun. And then there's this other group that's actually a Japanese manga group. It's this group of like middle-aged women called Clamp. And they write all of these manga that are just completely nothing to do with each other plot-wise, nothing to do with each other genre-wise. There's a fighting one and a teen romance one and a hard sci-fi one, but they're all set in the same universe. And it's so fascinating to A, know that they're all set in the same universe, and B, like know that it's a group of people working together to make sure that their work like coordinates with each other over at this point it's like 25 years of writing these books together. And I was just so inspired by the idea of that. I thought it was so cool. And I was like, man, I wonder if they'd let me get away with doing that too. Because they published both of the same publisher. So I had the opportunity to kind of talk to them about it. And what I really wanted to do for this book and for some future books was to create this town that's like very much like a, stereotypical kind of small town in the Midwest. Very like they had one factory that produced all of their jobs. And now they're pretty much just like living off of another town that's kind of nearby that has it's bigger and it has more resources and stuff, and that interesting things can and do happen in like isolated places. So we have these two boys doing the kind of fantasy, and then we have the two girls doing the thing that's kind of science fiction. And then the book that's coming after my Peter Pan book is a train heist novel about these girls that rob a train that goes through the town. And that one is a heist novel. And it's so fun to have people that you knew as teenagers and seeing what they became and like how they've transformed and what they've grown and changed from. And one of the things that the large aspect of that really made me want to create that in my writing was the idea that societies learn from certain like large traumas. So the experiences that the characters had in The Wicker King were just like nobody was really looking out for them. They were just kind of doing their own thing, but like them burning down this building, like everyone knows about what's going on with them now. Like it's a huge problem. And then in The Way to the Stars, all of the adults are like, are you doing okay? Is everything fine? Like, what's going on? Do you want to come and be at my house for some food? Like that entire community was like ravaged by the experience that happened. And they're like, we're not doing that anymore. Like we're gonna help these kids. And in the book that's coming up, it's a train heist. It is set, I believe, after The Wicker King, but before The Way to the Stars, and you get to see characters in The Way to the Stars in their like early 20s, and the kids, the kids who are going to rob the train, in a bar, and the bar is owned by the twins, and they're running it together, and they're just kind of like, I'm like, the only reason we're allowing you to be in here is so that we can watch to make sure you don't do anything weird.
Oh my god, I love this.
Amazing. Like, I don't even know much about it, but I already love it.
I'm here for the twins. I'm here for the twins, honestly.
I'm here for the heist. I'm here for the girls heisting around on a train. It sounds amazing.
Oh, God, I'm so excited for this book, too. It's every single author has an opportunity where like mainstream authors have opportunities where like they write a book and they're like, this could become a movie or this could become a TV show. And for this one, like, I really, really want, like, Wicker King and The Way of the Stars, like, it would be cool. Like, this one would be amazing to see.
It would blow our minds, honestly. Like, I'm already excited.
This is like, but now that I'm thinking about it, like, it probably would come out for a couple of years. So just like, what am I supposed to do for that time now?
Oh, this is like if you see it, this is like watching the Marvel trailer in like 2019. Like the movie doesn't come out until 2020, and you're just waiting like this. Like, when is the movie? You know.
Definitely.
Okay, so speaking of the twins, like I said, I love the twins. We love August so much. We love Ryan. We love James.
Mm-hmm.
But he's one of the most compelling characters that you've written, and like everyone that I've talked to who's read your books so far has like one of the biggest elements that attracts us to your writing is definitely your character work. So we have our favorites. Like, who's your favorite to write, and why is that character your most favorite person to write? Like, I know it's like asking you to choose between your children, but like
okay, so in The Wicker King, my favorite is Rena.
Ooh, yeah.
I think that she's, in regards to like how all the other young people deal with the situation that's going on with them, I think that she's one of the more responsible people who kind of understands like the basis of what's going on, which is these are people who need a family, who need home, and she tries her best to create that. And when she realizes that there's only so much she can give, she's like, hey, you guys need to like seek professional help. And like, I don't know if anyone else has told you to, but quit. You know? I really like that aspect of her. And I also like characters that allow other characters to be themselves. I think a lot of the time when you're reading a book, like all the characters who aren't the hero are looking for the hero to finally become who they should be, and they have these like expectations for them and stuff. And Rena is the only character who's just like, you doing what feels natural to you, you being what is natural to you is fine. You know, you just have to, you know, fix a little tiny things so you can have more fun and be more relaxed while being yourself and also being healthy and safe. Which honestly is something that I feel like a lot of teenagers want to have, and a lot of people want to, you know, be allowed to exist in the way that they should be. And for The Way to the Stars, I really like James. I do, but I really like the idea of Tomas, because he's very much a character that, like, I'm not going to say doesn't really exist, but kind of like exists in like LGBT fantasy, which is the gay character who is like also the like toughest and most like worthy of all the characters, who like gets insulted and just knocks someone just clean out, and everyone's like, oh yeah, we forgot he was strong. Him as, you know, a character
just reminds you of so many animes.
Yeah.
You're like,
very
oh my
much...
God, we forgot he was so strong.
Yeah. And I love that, you know, I love that feature of him. And a lot of people have read the book and they're like, oh, I can't really tell the difference between Tomas and, you know, his best friend. And I was just like, Tomas is the person who you think would be defended by Blake,
Yeah.
who's his great guy friend who's like really pushed and whatever. But Blake is just there to make sure that Tomas doesn't it's very much like an opposite, kind of relationship. And I just love their friendship and how close they are and how how very we've been friends for a really long time, their relationship is. So I'm really into that. But I love James. And actually a reader reached out to me when she was like in the middle of reading the book, and she was like, don't tell me the answer, but is James transgender? And I was like, that would have been so cool. Like if I had done that, that would have been such an interesting thing to have, especially for him being like a single father. But the reason I wrote James is like a single cis father is because, or a teen father is because when I was in high school, one of my friends was a teen father, and he was the responsible person in that dynamic. And when he was, I think he was 17 when his girlfriend had a kid, and then when he was 18 they both died in a car accident. He was like the teen father that stepped up and then still got that strip from him. And when I was talking to him loosely about it when we were like 19 or so, he was like, when I first became a teen father, I felt so isolated and so alone, and the only thing that people would talk about is like teen mothers, and the only impression that people had of teen fathers was that they just play video games while their girlfriend would do everything. And it was so terrible. And I would love for there to have been something in which I could see myself and my circumstances reflected. And I was like, you know what? I got you. I'll put that in for you. And I made James for my friend.
Oh my God. That is honestly one of the sweetest things I've ever heard. Oh my God.
He's doing all right now. He's happy. He's married.
Yeah.
He's recovered, but
that is like one of the things about James is he doesn't interact with the characters as much, but he's this solid presence in Ryan's life, in Tomas's life, in even in Ahmed's life, and he's always there for his kid. He talks to his kid. Like you have alluded to the fact that he talks to his kid even though he doesn't talk to anybody else, and that's just like one of the most heartwarming things about his character. And like it's so beautiful that there are real people who are represented so wonderfully in fiction. So that's
So since we are talking about inspirations and how real life can sometimes inspire characters, what is your drafting process like? Like you mentioned that you have ADHD, so you write small chapters, and so you don't have to spend a lot of time working it all out. So how do you go through the entire process of drafting a book, revising it? And I think Anandi told me that you completed The Wicker King in like 4 months.
I
And
did.
I was really amazed by that. And I was just like, how is that even possible? So yeah, we're really interested to know how you do such amazing things.
So by nature, I'm a very disorganized person. I'm a procrastinator. I was that person who would be in class before the teacher came to pick up homework, feverishly doing the homework before he got to my desk, or I just wouldn't do it at all. It's always been horrible. Academics for me has been such a huge struggle. And I've always, I think I graduated with a B average or something, but it's always been something where it's I participate in class at 100% and my projects are pristine because I never remember my homework. So I've gotten used to, having to make up for my own shortcomings in certain ways. And I do think it's very important that when you have certain things like learning disabilities or, organizational issues and stuff like that, instead of trying to force yourself to be like everybody else, you figure out ways to survive that suit your own styles of learning and styles of achieving things. So for me, I have to be extremely organized about how I write my books. And the reason that I'm telling you this before I tell you how is because it's going to sound like I'm an extremely type A person, and I need you to know that that's not what's going on. So when I write books, I write 3 outlines. I write one outline that is, and this is before I start writing it all. I write one that is just the plot. It's just this happens, that happens, this happens, that happens. Then I write a second outline that is what development is happening, the character development, the, emotional development, and, what's going on with, all of that. And my third outline is an outline that is written about how I want the readers to feel while they are reading the book. So I started out and I'm like, I want the readers to open this book and be like, for the Wicker King, and be like, oh, this is just a stereotypical, like, you know, I'm a delinquent kid and you're the cool kid table and the whatever kid table, and I'm cool because I do whatever. And then like the next part of the book, you realize that like that's just him posturing. He's actually like desperately in need of assistance. Like, you know, he's not type A because he's this way. He's type A because he's trying to distract people from the fact that he's like really poor and super neglected, and like, you know, just stuff like that that kind of gives richness. And I just talk about, you know, this is how I want the reader to feel, and then during the climax of the book I want them to feel this. And it makes it really easy for me to control how the book is progressing, how the pacing of the book is, whether it's, you know, well paced or not. Because a lot of the time with thrillers like The Wicker King, you can control how tense somebody feels while reading it by increasing the amount of action that's close to each other. So in the beginning of the book, there's a lot of filler, lots of them sitting around, hanging out, talking to each other. And then when like stuff starts getting real, it's like, we went outside, then we did this, and then we did that, and then somebody was crying, and there was a fire, and you're just like, oh my God. Like, that's on purpose, and that's something that I designed ahead of time. Then when it's time to actually sit down and write the book, I break the original plot design into chapters or sections. So I'll be like, you know, oh, the beginning of the book is from page, you know, this to page that. And then I'll just like, you know, break it down into little pieces. For Darling, what I did was I broke it down into chapters, and then I would I highlighted the whole thing in red. And then as I progressed, I would change it to like yellow and green when I was finished. And I would just go through just writing exactly what I said I was going to write for each chapter, with no changes, no, you know, exploration or anything like that. And then when I'm finished, I read through the outline, I read through the original book, and then I read through my final outline of how the pacing goes, and I make sure that all of those things are together. And it seems like it would be one of those things that would be difficult to like shift. Like if I made a scene and I'm like, oh, this is too passive, or I need more excitement. But honestly, when you're doing that kind of editing, you just change certain things. Like instead of saying he whispered, you could say he shouted, or you know, instead of she walked quickly, she sprinted, or you can just remove entire sentences of just like, you know, exposition that make it feel so much more compact, or you can expand it out to make it feel more languorous. And then after I'm done with all of that, I just kind of fling it at my editor, and then they do all the stuff for me. You'd be surprised how many editors look at books before they make it to shelves. It's like 8 different people. Yeah. So
that's a lot.
It is, yeah. Because I mean, one person can't catch all the mistakes, and I certainly can't, because I'm focused on writing it. But when you finish a manuscript, it's understood that somebody else is going to try to fix your punctuation, try to fix your, you know,
the minor
grammar.
Things,
exactly. So when it comes to, you know, getting things out really quickly, it's a lot easier for me. Like I wrote Darling in like 2 months because I procrastinated for the entire year, and then I was like, oh no, they paid me to do it now. But with The Wicker King, because I was writing it just like by myself and stuff, it took me 4 months, and it actually took me 3 months to write it and a month to rearrange it, because it was actually written in a nonlinear format. I had the book broken into 2. The first half was right up until the fire, and then the second half was them basically like in the hospital. And the way it was originally arranged on Tumblr, secret, I had the hospital scenes spliced in between the other things. So every time they would do something like, oh, they're gonna, you know, choose to do this, you'd see one scene of them being punished for what they've done. And then like as the book is progressing and as they're getting closer and closer to, you know, doing what they did, like there's scenes where the scene at the end of the book is them starting the fire. So they're standing in front of it, and he's like, you know, what would you do for me? And he's like, I'd burn anything for you. And he does it. And then the scene directly after that was August getting his stuff and, you know, being let back out into the world. But like the build-up scenes that were like all like, you know, oh, we're in the hospital, we're doing this, and it's like August is like, well, of course we're not gonna try to contact the authorities to help us with our problems. Then he's like literally institutionalized. He's like, this is bad.
Oh my god.
It was a really fun concept, but my agent at the time was like, hey, there's so much stuff going on with this book already. You need to make this into a format that is more palatable to mainstream readers. So I need you to rearrange this entire book into regular linear format. So I spent like a while doing that.
Wow.
Okay.
That's, yeah, like as someone who reads a lot of stuff on Tumblr, like I understand why you did that there, and like you changed it up for the book, because I think this was in its own way extremely powerful, because you saw them spiral, like you said, you kind of could see them spiral into like utter chaos throughout the book. So that was absolutely wow.
I'm glad it
Yeah,
worked.
it was effective. It worked. Yeah. So yeah, like, okay, we're talking about them getting punished for their things and them getting institutionalized and all of that. And that, so both of your books do have these very, very heavy themes, even though they deal with kids. You have a lot of like the mental illness, physical illness, you have neglect, you have abuse, and it's not easy to like, I can't imagine it's easy to write it, because it's not easy to absorb it as well. So how do you like, what is the thing that like you've already spoken about the James character, but in general, what is the thing that inspired you to like make these themes the center of your work? And how do you approach this stuff, like, because it's not it's a very sensitive topic, so how do you approach it, and how do you deal with it, and how do you think people could do better with what is out in the world right now?
Certainly. So I try to write what I call representational fiction. So when I was growing up, and a lot of people in general, when you think about like the people that you knew and the friends that you had and like what they went through and everything, a lot of the time you don't think like, oh, we're all traumatized and what happened was trauma. Like,
Yeah.
or, that friend who always had a house that we can go and hang out at, who, we can play and do whatever we want because their parents weren't there, like that kid was being neglected. Like, you don't really think about that in that way. You just think this is what happened when I grew up. For me, it's important to be able to showcase those things happening, because I think that my readers will be either people who have grown out of those experiences or people who are currently experiencing that stuff. So the way that like the diversity in my books, the way that my characters react with each other, like the way their romantic relationships are, it's very similar to the way that it was when I was growing up. And I went to like a public school, so all sorts of things were happening there. And even like little things, like, I mean, the core of The Wicker King is about the situation between Jack and August, but the other people who are in the periphery are also in their own ways dealing with something of some kind. Like the twins' parents, they're really, really wealthy. They have like a vast difference in social circumstances than everybody else in their town, but there's only one school, so they have to go there. And, their parents are always flying around and stuff. So technically they're being neglected too, because their parents are never home. And then there's the friend character who brings the basket of muffins and whatever. She's the first person to notice that August has stopped eating and that he has like a stress, created eating disorder. So clearly she can recognize those features in others, which means that she's probably seen something like that in her life. And also she's very, very intense about her own schoolwork in a way that's like kind of really, aggressive and unusual. And then there's Rena, and she's an interesting character because she's like 19 or something, and her parents went back home and left her there. And she's this character who has this like really like strong cultural ties to her background, but she's only creating it within her own bubble of her own home. And when Jack and August are there, she has an opportunity to kind of like share with them and like be with them. And especially like with in The Way of the Stars, like Ahmed and his family, and what it means to be a kid whose parents are both South Asian, and you have this other maybe dad who's white, but he's Italian, and no one can tell who your real dad is because everybody's looking kind of similar in this house. And like his choice to explore his religion, even though his parents are like just secular as all get out, and they're just kind of like,
Yeah.
we support what you're trying to do, but his own thing where he's like, I'm gonna be rebellious and smoke weed, like, and then just like Shannon, who's the popular girl, and about how she had this brother who was like really alternative and really, just like not what their family expected their child to be, and about how she grew as a person to appreciate people who are like him and wound up being a cool cheerleader who hangs out with the weird kids, and just like that environment of richness of character was one that I very much wanted to place in my books, regardless of the fact of whether I had personal experience with these things or not. And a part of that in regards to being able to write it is taking it seriously and taking it responsibly. I think that if you're going to write about experiences that you haven't had yourself, one, you have to do like a lot of research, and like responsible research, primary research. For Jack's condition, I reached out to one of the 2 remaining living doctors who handled people who had peduncular hallucinosis and begged them for interviews, because I wanted to be able to portray this as accurately as possible, because, God forbid somebody winds up having that disorder and picks up my book. I want them to be able to see what is happening and be like, maybe I should get this checked out, And when you're writing for teenagers, especially, understanding that you have the responsibility to create work that serves children, that isn't for you getting your own, whatever out and stuff like that because you're an artist. You're writing to serve people who will become adults, who will be a part of our society. So taking that seriously as a responsibility is really important to me. When it comes to the second tier of that, which is authenticity readers, for The Wicker King and The Way of the Stars, I didn't have any authenticity readers. The budget wasn't there. It was just a different situation. We had a different kind of environment in publishing. But now I wouldn't put out a book without one ever, because I think that it's really important to be able to have an internal perspective on what's going on for 2 reasons. First one is just to be respectful, just as a baseline. Yeah. The second is when you are doing research, because you are not somebody of that group, you cannot tell the quality of your own research at like 100%. Like you can't. Like there have been situations where people will do research about, I don't know, let's say ADHD or something. And they're reading all these primary sources about ADHD, but they don't know that they're written by groups that are funded by people who do not want to promote proper attention to this disorder or something like that. And it's so difficult to tell when you don't have the insight to be able to be like, oh, I'm familiar with that, or like I've recognized that this tribe of people has been oppressing this other tribe for a really long time, and just because they're both indigenous, I shouldn't just take the word of this other tribe just because they live nearby and it's almost similar. Like you need to know that. So authenticity readers really do add a lot to that process. And there's a thing that I've started doing that I think that people who also work with authenticity readers should consider trying, which is I put in like a temporary text. So in my new book, Darling, I have a character who's replacing Tiger Lily. Her name is Ominatago, and she is an indigenous character. And when I sent the book out to be authenticity read, I was like, if you want to rewrite the dialogue, you can. I'll put it straight to print, whatever it is that you wanted. If you want to change these things, like it's not like I won't think about your changes or be like, how can I alter this? Like I will just change what you gave me. Because your insight and your perspective is that important to me, that everything that I wrote is not actually something that I want to keep. It's something that I'm putting there to hold space, to make sure that the rest of the like body of the story, the tapestry, doesn't unravel. And there's space for you that has been designated for you to put yourself in here. So, and she wound up just being like, oh, I just want to change these 2 little details. I really like the character. But like being able to say, give this is yours if you would want it, is like a really powerful decision to make and a really powerful thing to give to a person who is from a marginalized group that is not your own. And I think that when authors are working on work, I don't necessarily think that you shouldn't try to write characters that aren't from your background, because I think it's important to have diverse casts. But choosing to write from the perspective of somebody who's not yours and trying to tell their story is probably not the best. But for background characters, making sure that they have you put in the research to at least try before you handed it off to somebody else is really important. And then also the handing it off to somebody else is very important.
Yeah.
Thank you
Oh,
so
wow.
much.
Thank
That
you
was
so
very
much.
insightful. Yeah.
Yeah, that was extremely insightful, and just the amount of care that you put into that entire thought process. It's a, I don't know what to say, but like as we, both of us, we are South Asians, and we have seen a lot of bad representation
Bad
of us
reference.
in
Uh,
media,
it
and
hurts communities, even though it's not. I know authors don't intend to do that, but it does hurt when you say someone is, say, I am Tamilian, like I'm from South India, but you say someone is from South India and then you give them North Indian characteristics. It's like, good effort, but
You
yeah,
tried.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
the cake, the
So,
meme with the you tried
yeah, so
star. Like,
along with
yeah.
that
Yeah.
same line of, South Asians, I really liked how in The Way of the Stars, the South Asian parents, they were so supportive, because I think this is something that we talk about a lot, because when we try to write fiction, we're just like, oh, we have to be as realistic as possible, and we constantly write parents who are not supportive
Strict
at all,
parents,
and
yeah.
then they're just kind of horrible to their children. And it's just like it doesn't it breaks your heart to see that this is how everyone sees us all the time.
Yeah.
And yes, I really love that you wrote such supportive parents for your South Asian character. And we
I
love
mean,
Ahmed,
Reena
of course.
herself, yeah, like
Yeah.
Reena herself is like, she's such a, vibrant character. And I don't think we get to see enough of that, especially for South Asian women. So it
Yeah.
was just, she's,
Yeah, she's
she's
my favorite.
yeah,
Totally,
I
this is
know.
totally not biased at all. But yeah, she's my favorite.
No, Gargee's like her unofficial wife.
Mhm.
Do not expose me like this.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so now let's play a very simple. We'll do a rapid fire round, and we'll ask you questions, and you have to tell us which of your characters fits this
Okay.
question. Like, okay, so we'll do which of your characters will be a famous TikToker?
Ahmed, immediately. I'm gonna do it.
He has a really good personality. I believe in him. He
Ooh,
can do
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
He's cool. He's a cool kid.
Yeah.
Who would actually go to the Area 51 raid?
Ryan would.
Oh my
Oh my
He would.
god.
oh my
I think
god.
she
Oh my
would just stroll in there to just be like, oh, I'm going to punch some people. I don't care if they're aliens or if they're the US military, I'll punch them. Okay. So during quarantine, who will start a DIY channel on YouTube?
DIY. Shannon. I think Shannon would.
Yeah. I think she
She'd
would
be one
use
of
all
those
her
people.
brothers. Yeah, and she
She
would
would
like
like.
ransack
Go
her
ahead, go
brothers.
ahead.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah, please. Yeah,
I do think that she would ransack her brother's closet. I feel like she'd be the kind of
yeah.
person where you see her and you're like, oh, it's just some blonde girl. And she'd be like, I brought my friend. And then her friend is like this weirdo. And you're like, okay.
Okay.
Yes.
So who would have an Instagram feed full of like emo quotes that are just so reminiscent of like 2000s Tumblr?
Oh, God. I think August. I think he
Yeah,
would. It
that
would be a
was my
secret.
Yeah,
guess too.
It would be a
Yeah, it would
yeah,
secret Tumblr.
definitely be anonymous. And he would
yeah.
like get a lot of followers who would be from his school. They'd be like, oh my god, who is this mystery guy?
Yeah.
Okay. So, who would have the funniest background for their Zoom classes?
Still think Ahmed. I think he would clinch that. He would be like, this is now a joke for me.
Who would never let go of their Tiger King phase? All through 2020, they're like Tiger King.
Probably Tomas. I feel like Tomas would be like, just into it, you know?
I would
Yeah.
really like to see him like cosplay that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, like
I do
maybe he
have
could
one more.
go on Sharon's YouTube channel for that.
Yeah. They'd be like, do like a switch episode where they're both in the same one and then have it both on their channels.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I did want to say something about representation because you did mention something about like people reading about, you know, like other people's cultures and how they're being represented to like outside groups
Yeah.
and stuff. Um, it's a really weird thing to kind of like think about while you're writing or to like talk about, but when you are somebody who is writing about your own in-group, like, you know, me as a Black person writing about like Black people, a lot of the time we kind of like imagine that the only people who are reading it is people from within that in-group, and we're talking directly to them, and we're like showing, you know, all of our dirty laundry and being like, it's so real life that I'm experiencing this and you experience it too and we're together. And like there's so much glory in the opportunity to being able to reach, you know, your diaspora and, you know, talk to them about these sort of things. But I think that there's something that's like inherently very specifically like Western while doing that, which is the fact that people who are in the out group from that will look into things that are meant for the in group and make conclusions about what that group is like based on us showing each other our vulnerability, and then they will make our vulnerability the poster for what our life is like. Like I don't know, for example, like a lot of books came out in the like early 90s that are kind of specifically about like East Asian, like tiger mom kind of things. And it was all written by like women who are like, I had this experience of incredible struggle being like a first generation American from, you know, this place. My parents did these things for me and they were really hard on me and it was breaking my heart. And, you know, it's all of this stuff. And then like the general like Western, like, you know, opinion of this group of people for a really long time was, this is what they are like all the time at home, and this is what all the moms are like, and this is what all the dads are like, and these are what all the expectations are, and they just stuck with it and just with it, and it was terrible. Like, and like really disrespectful. And I think that when people are writing, keeping in mind that people who aren't like you are reading it and are going to be making like assumptions about certain things is really important. And one of the characters that I rarely talk about, people rarely ask me questions about this character, but it's August's mom. And the way that her severe mental illness is portrayed in that book, like it would have been easy for me to just be like, oh, I, as somebody who, you know, experienced catatonic depression, like I'm just going to write about how gross it is and, you know, how much it sucks and all the feelings that I have about that. And I was like, instead of doing that, I'm going to take this opportunity to create a portrayal of this issue with compassion, where it's very clear that even though she's incredibly ill, she does very much love her son and very much love Jack as well. And that when it comes to like moments that matter, like once a year on Christmas, she takes all of the life energy that she has and puts it into getting up and cooking something and doing her hair and dressing nice for the first time all year, just to make sure that they have this thing. And that August is very aware, even though he's like at that very moment being neglected and that situation is bad and stuff like that, that, you know, that he's loved and that what is going on with his mom isn't her fault. And because it's not her fault, that the effort that she's giving has different weight than the effort that another parent might have given. So I think that it's important that when you're thinking about portrayals of stuff to like keep in mind that sometimes you need to be PR for something that you're doing, just to keep the rest of, you know, everybody who's a real person dealing with these things, living in a world that is comfortable for them.
Yeah, well, I really liked actually the representation of August's mom because I don't know, I am kind of the person who goes like it doesn't happen to be like that it happens to her, but there are some times when I would go into what my mom likes to call the depression house and I
Yeah.
would not emerge from it for days.
Yeah.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's like when people from outside who don't experience the similar things, they see it as us being lazy. And to see that portrayed in a compassionate manner meant a lot to me. So thank you for writing that. And also,
Uh,
you know what you said about uh, uh, authors of color writing their experiences and they see it as something that they're writing for people in their own community. I think that that is obviously very valid. But then again, I think it becomes a question about diversity in publishing because we constantly get the same kind of stories. Not the same kind of stories. I mean, we constantly get the same kind of representation, as in, like, the parents are always strict, like we were talking about. And I think if more authors were given the chance to write and just be as mainstream as everyone else, then we would get other kinds of stories as well, where we would see supportive parents, where we would see absent parents, and I don't know, many other kinds of parents. There's not one a single way to be a parent, and yeah,
I mean, it all comes down to it's nobody's a monolith, right? Like any community, any sect of people or whatever. So that it is like there must be discretion toward like on the side of the reader and the author. Like it's a collaborative effort to like understand that this is an individual experience and not supposed to be representative of like people.
Yes,
Like you
all
can't do
people
that.
in that
Yeah.
community. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, this kind of got
Okay.
so sad.
Oof.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. Okay, so there was this one question I wanted to ask you because so I really admire this blogger called Fadwa. Like I don't know if you've heard of her.
Oh, I know her. Yeah, she's great.
Yeah. So they've there's this one question that they put at the end of all of their blog like interview blog posts that I really love. So I want to know what you would say to that. So it's so if you want your readers to take one thing away from your books, what would that be? Like if you want what would you want your books to be perceived as? Like like what would you want people to learn from it?
I have a lot of like respect and admiration for the like tenacity and the way that teenagers try to handle problems, whether or not they're successful, they always try. Like it is a consistent, like they always try, whether they're trying and their ways of trying aren't going very well, or if they're, if they are just knocking it out of the park. The Wicker King is a book about teenagers trying and failing. The Way to the Stars is a book about teenagers excelling beyond their parents' expectations. And for me, it's always about, teenagers being given problems, because they're, regardless of what's going on, whether you're like a rich teenager who's been giving everything her entire life, or somebody who's dealing with a lot of real life personal struggles and stuff that you can't control at all, there's that immediate like, I can handle this, that they all feel. And I think that that's something that a lot of the times a lot of adults don't take into consideration, or they don't respect, or they don't understand, or they don't have value for. And I think that at the end of the day, regardless of what genre my books are, regardless of what happens in them, they're always going to be about teenagers trying. And in The Way to the Stars, it's very much written in such a way where the teenagers are aware that their parents did their own version of trying and did really badly, just like in The Wicker King. And they're like, just because you did really badly doesn't mean that I can't learn from what happened to you and do really good on the first try. And all of the teenagers in that had their own version of that. Like James is an amazing father. He does a great job. Tomas is fully being himself. Like they're all doing something that is really specific, and they're succeeding, and it's beautiful. And for Darling, not to like give stuff away, but for Darling, it's about these teenagers who are given a circumstance, which is Peter Pan being a murderer. And they're like, how can we help with, like, how can we get him off the streets? Like, we are all like between the ages of 16 and 18, and like, this is really bad, and we can't just let this happen. We need to do something. And for the train heist book that's coming out, the general like plot of it is that there's these kids. There's this one kid who has epilepsy, and they want to steal money on this Christmas train that's a real thing that goes from Chicago to New York for the holidays. And it just like takes like a 3-day trip, and then when you get there, there's like a giant party, and it's like the sleeper train. Tickets are like $7,000. It's just full of rich people. And they're like, we're gonna rob this train, but we're gonna rob the like petty cash box that they have at the back, where you have to carry like, I think it's like $300,000 to give people change for if they buy a drink on the train or something. And they're like, we don't want to deal with any of the people. We're just gonna rob the cash box and leave. And they get on the train to like pay for their friends' epilepsy continued hospitalizations and medication. And when they get on the train, it's being robbed by adults. And then they're like, we're out of our depth. We need to, the new goal, get off the train. They're just trying to not be hostages. And like, it's just like a really funny, anti-heist book. And at the very core of it, even though it's really funny and really, like hijinksy, kind of like Scooby-Doo and whatever, it's about these teenagers who saw a problem, which was their friend being ill and poor and incapable of dealing with the problems, and basically at death's door, and being like, you know what? We're not gonna just sit around, and we're not gonna, cry about it. for as the only thing that we do. We're going to cry about it, and then we're going to do something. And also, we have thought about whether or not stealing is bad. We've decided that helping people is more important than whether stealing is bad. And then, like, you know, their whole thought process about the criminal justice system, like, it's all about teenagers making plans, because I think that, you know, it's what they do in real life, and I want to honor that.
I'm getting so excited for this house book. I cannot wait for it to come out. So, uh, well, I cannot get out of the mindset of the heist book. I will think about it for so many days to come. And don't mind me if I make headcanons without knowing the story at all.
Go for it.
Okay.
This is the first book that's gonna have fan fiction before there is actual fiction out.
First time for everything.
Man.
Okay, this is kind of a long-winded one. So while your characters, they, you know, have their struggles with being queer, and they're not exactly, how do you say it? It's not like, oh, they're out there and they're living their lives, but they are, I think, in some ways, very good representations of being queer, even though it's not the most central part of the story.
They're just like unapologetically, you know, queer.
Yeah, they're unapologetically
Stories, the
themselves.
stories are, yeah.
So it's like, it's, even though it doesn't seem like it's the when we don't have a lot of representation, especially, you know, for queer people of color, it's hard to find. But although these days a lot of books are coming out and we're really happy about them. So to have stories that are not centered around queerness, but yet celebrate queerness so beautifully, so vibrantly, how did you achieve that?
So this is actually related to how old I am and what was going on with books when I was a kid. I was definitely from that, like, Harry Potter, you know, Lemony Snicket era of, like, young adult fiction, where young adult was just becoming its own thing. And before that, we had books that were like, they just called them like children's books. So they were mostly just books about children, and they weren't necessarily geared specifically towards kids. They were just like, these are can be read by kids, and they're about kids' perspectives. And a lot of the time they were like educational of some kind, or like they had like a thing they were trying to teach us or whatever. And all of the books, and there weren't very many, but all of the books that were about like LGBTQ experiences across the board, first of all, were tragic. They were tragic stories about tragic things that happened to people. And second of all, the entire plot, like the entire conflict of the plot, was them being not straight. And it was like, it was a thing that they woke up worrying about, you know, at the beginning of the day. And it was a thing that they thought about as they cried into their pillow at night. And it was very much like all about that. And like, as somebody who grew up in that era, writing a story that includes people who are LGBT, in which that's just a feature, like there's something much worse going on that we need to handle, was like, it's like a defiant thing. And when I wrote The Wicker King, which was in 2011, 2012, what we have now, because it's almost a decade later, what we have now is so much different. But when I was writing it at the time, there really wasn't. And like, you know, a lot of people talk about people writing who are like women writing like, you know, gay guy perspectives or bi guy perspectives and stuff like that. Back when I was writing The Wicker King, there was so little representation that I could just write by representation and like be considered as writing my own, like, you know, own voices like book at the time, because there was nothing else. It was like me and like one other person, and that was it. And so, you know, writing these stories, I was like, okay, I have the responsibility to write about what it is to be questioning, what it is to be, you know, bi and be confident in yourself, which is what Jack was, you know, what it is to have problems that are bigger than just dealing with your orientation, because most people, like, that's, yes, it's a huge stressor, but there are other stressors that are compounding that, or, you know, like if you're worried about your parents throwing you out because you might be gay, like there are other things that are making you worried that they would even throw you out to begin with. Like it starts with that, you know. So I really wanted to write a story that was like, you know, had something bigger than just that one perspective. And then in regards to what was that other thing that you asked as a part of the question? Writing like these vibrant characters that have these perspectives and they don't really talk about it or come out or use terminology or anything like that. One, my perspective on using terminology has changed since the original writing of these two books. I think that it's important to have that terminology now, because I think a lot of people will argue with people who are of that background about whether or not they've actually got their representation. So Alexandria in The Way of the Stars, she's a lesbian. And I didn't use the word lesbian. And now my book is with another pile of other books who are way more homophobic than mine, who talk about women loving women, but who think lesbian's like kind of a dirty word and don't use. And that was never something that I really intended. I really wanted it to be extraordinarily clear from that you were reading it that this is a butch lesbian. And I think I did an okay job of like pushing that narrative through. But because I didn't use the terminology, like of course it's something that people are like, oh, you know, what if ... And it's like I should have just said it. But just like before I felt that way about that. It was important to me to create a world that, being the many ways that people can be in regards to the way that they love, who they love, how they love, if they love, is something that is not challenged by anyone, was me creating a safe space that exists before 2014. Like that exists in a lot, like not a lot, but like a decent amount of books now, that they're like, oh, we're not going to do historically accurate homophobia. We're not going to do, there's homophobia even though it's set in, you know, a fantasy land or whatever. Like people are doing that now, but before that they really weren't. So I was like, there's not a place where people are just being, you know? So I wanted to make that for people who wished to have that for themselves. So that's why that's that way.
Yeah.
That's,
So,
like, we're both
like
women, so we really appreciate everything that you've done with the queer characters. Like that, the reason we wanted to like talk about it was because of like how impactful it was for us on a personal level.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So I think that really expresses the sentiment of, you know, being queer is like the least interesting thing about me most of the time. There's just like so much going on. Who cares? So I don't know how to explain this, but like it makes things easy on a queer person reading the book when they don't have to see another queer character constantly deal with that pressure of having to come out or having to deal with homophobia. It's very freeing. And I think we both really appreciated that. So
yeah, it's writing LGBT content is really interesting for a lot of reasons. But like when I came out, I was like 13 or something. Like I've always like been out. Like I had a girlfriend when I was 12. Like I wasn't really caring. Like I grew up in a family where my parents were like, told me about being Black. Like, oh, if somebody has a problem with you being Black, that's their problem, not your problem. Don't change the way you feel about yourself because of that. And I just like applied that across everything. And I was like, oh, if I feel this, whatever, like that's your problem. So I've never really had to deal with a lot of like, you know, self-loathing that a lot of people had to deal with. But one of the things that, because I came out so young, that I'm very into, a lot more so than a lot of other people, I've had the opportunity to learn my history as being an LGBT person. Like I spent a lot of time debuting into the world of LGBT culture through a bunch of drag queens that I was friends with when I was like 13. Like they taught me how to do my makeup, they taught me how to do my hair, like they were super cool. And as a part of being close to this demographic, they taught me a lot about what it is to be somebody who's LGBT, like from the past maybe 300 years, and how that looked, and about how different things were before that for LGBT people, how, you know, culturally speaking, people were in positions of like honor and respect and, you know, all of that, and how something happened and all of that changed. And that since then been like a kind of like a wave of like, oh, we'll get like a bunch of, you know, support from the public, and then it'll go back down and they'll be like, we hate you and we're gonna hunt you down, and they're gonna give a little bit of support and then they're gonna hunt you down. And like learning about things like, you know, the huge trans like support movement in 1920 through 1930s Germany, and then how when the Nazis came they like burned all of that, and like now trans people in Germany are still having a lot of difficulties. Or learning about like, you know, like the like 1900s when there were like a ton of, there was just like tons of lesbian movies that came out in like 1901 through 1908, and you know, and the Hays Code happened and like all of them were destroyed. So the understanding as a writer who writes about LGBT stuff is that like we're in a period of wax, and historically speaking, there may be another period of wane.
Yeah.
And knowing that the work that I'm working on right now might be the only thing that someone has access to during the waning period makes you take that very seriously. And it's very rare that I talk to another author and they don't understand the seriousness of what it means to write, stuff. And usually if they don't, it's not that they're, maliciously, they're doing it because they're like, oh, I want to write it for myself. And I'm like, you're not writing it for yourself. You're writing it for children and you're writing for the future. And you need to understand that and respect that while you're creating this work. And one of the things that is very impacted in my work is both the things that you guys noticed about how I present, people who are having these things and questioning and stuff like that, but also who I choose to write about, how I choose to write about them. I have chosen to write about, gay people, lesbians, and I recently, for Darling, I have a character who's asexual, but biromantic. And it's really funny because he's like a hot guy and like girls like him and, guys think he's really hot and he like flirts with everybody. But he's like, haha, don't touch me. like, that's his whole thing. And it's really, really cute. And I love him so much. And people have asked me if I want to write any trans characters, and I've always turned them down because of what I just described. And it's that trans people are going through a what they call like hypervisibility, in which they're a very small group, but a lot of people are talking about whether or not they deserve rights, and they have like a lot of opinions. And like groups, all marginalized groups go through periods of this at some point. Like the autistic community became hypervisible like maybe 5 years ago, and it's starting to wane just a little bit. But when a group is going through hypervisibility like that, having the perspectives written about them, being written by those people in that group to be the most accurate as humanly possible during that period of time is like the most important thing in the whole wide world, basically. So, even though I'm creating these perspectives and I'm doing this stuff, for the culture, making sure that I'm mindful about what it is that I'm doing, who it is that I'm talking about, how I'm talking about them, because my work might be all that's left. And the people who are doing stuff might be all we have, is a really important aspect of being an author.
Oh, we hope that waiting period doesn't come, because there are many ways for all of us to go. And yeah,
but it
we
is
won't be
it
that
is
blip in the history.
but thank you for like putting so much care into what you do, because it's so important that people who have even like a little bit of influence have that take that responsibility, because nobody else will if you don't. And that's just like, we're going to be eternally grateful for that.
Thank you. Yeah. I hope it pans out, and I hope I never have to, be like, I was right. That's really sad. It's a really sad thing to think about.
Yeah.
But
thank you so much, Kayla, for joining us. We had a wonderful time. Just
this is great.
Yeah, this is the best first interview with an author that we could have done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for writing these wonderful books. Thank you for telling us so much about the Heist book, and for giving me ideas for like at least a month. Yeah. So
we're anticipating Darling with everything, because we're like, you've given us little tidbits everywhere, so we're waiting for what you have to show us with your next work. And thank you so much for being here. Thanks so much for agreeing to this. Like, I never thought this would be something that would happen when we started planning this read along, and it's amazing. Yeah.
Okay. So while
we just wanted to let you know that, like, absolutely, yeah.
So while we are talking about Darling, I just want to mention to the people who will be watching this that at the end of the read along, we will be hosting a giveaway for the pre-order of Darling from your local indie store or whatever other international store you want to order to. So please be on the lookout for that. I'll add a link in the description below. And once again, Kayla, thank you so much for joining us. We can't wait for Darling, and hopefully we will maybe get to read it along with the same people that we read The Wicker King and The Weight of the Steps with.
Okay, sounds great. You guys have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.